Hey y'all, so someone asked me about how do I go about publishing a book as an independent author, as an indie author, or a self published author. And I was like, it's all here. And then I have like a whole bunch of planning sheets on my drive as well that I use. And at first I was like, well, I'm such a newbie. I've only been doing it for 5 years. I don't think like I'm an expert. I'm nowhere near the expert level. But then I started to think, I was like, well, let me share what I do know. And I created some videos then of how I tackle publishing a book, kind of like a project. And it's like I'm a project manager for my own project. So I'm kind of like the lion tamer and the lion itself. I'm also a Leo. And I want to share with you all because this question kind of prompted me to think that perhaps even the little that I know, I can share. So these are the videos that I made about it. I don't know how many videos there will be, but I have phases. I have three phases. The creative phase, which is the easy one, the one that I love to do, the marketing phase, and then the logistic phase, the logistic and dinero phase. That's the one that sustains the dream, y'all. So I have those three phases, and I put my planning into those three buckets. Mind you, those phases, sometimes I do it concurrently. For sure, as I'm creating, I am also marketing. And even before any of that, I had already planned it out, set out the budget, started putting some money aside. So even phase three goes concurrently, particularly, for example, right? If I'm doing a pre order campaign, some of that is going to go into phase three. So things are interlinked and connected. And that is something that I wanted to talk to y'all about. And we're going to tackle it in videos and in faces. So if this is something that y'all want to hear, for sure, tap in, save it, like it, comment so it can continue to show up on your algorithm, and subscribe so that way you can continue to get these videos and these sort of how to's. There's a whole planning aspect to this. So while I break it down into three phases, some of these phases go concurrently with one another. So that's why for me, it is very important to plan each phase before I even begin drafting. And the way that I plan it is by asking myself these questions, coming up with the answers, and then annotating every single one of them into this Excel spreadsheet. And I use that then to validate the plan and see if the plan is feasible. And just like the story, as I'm drafting it, I mold it until the plan is feasible for me, for my lifestyle, for my resources. So on phase one, which is the creative part of this project management that is a book, what I usually ask myself is, when do I want to have this book published? When it comes to The Ordinary Bruja, I knew that I wanted the book to be published in the fall. I knew that I wanted it to be published in November. The first day that I picked was November 4th for it. I wanted it to be a Tuesday, as traditional published books are. So then I set November 4th as the date that I wanted the book to be published. So now I have a date that I can backwards plan from. So I knew this was me, my past self, talking to myself in 2023 and 2024. So I was like, okay, I got some time to do this project. I'm giving myself ample time. I'm not crunching my timeline too much on this project. And then I started asking myself about the story itself. When it comes to The Ordinary Bruja, I had this as a short story already. Y'all can see that I went through several life things during that time after I've written it and turned it into an Insta story and put it on Instagram, that there was some things that happened in which I was looking at this story through a completely different lens, more through a lens of Dominican identity and what happens when we forget our full inheritance and just completely ignore it. Who do we become, or who are we at risk of becoming? And because I experienced that, now I was tapping into the theme of this story. And this is something that I ask myself before I even start drafting anything, after I get the date of when I want this story to be published. And then I start thinking about the story itself. And I'm like, the theme. What is the theme? What do I want to present? I look, and this is probably my academia background, but I look at these manuscripts as thesis statements. And I think that's because that was how I could graduate from the MFA program, was by turning in my thesis statement, which is a manuscript ready to be published. And now everything that I publish, I'm looking at it as this thesis. What am I presenting to the public? What is it that I want them to get out of this book? Entertainment is a given because it's a fictional story. So I do want them to escape. I do want them to be entertained. That's the gist of it. That's given. But for me, there's also a theme here. There's a statement that I want to impart on the reader. And when it comes to the ordinary bruja, because of the things that I went through, I for sure wanted the reader to come out understanding how important authentic identity is and what we can lose or what we can risk when we veer away from our authentic selves and embracing our authentic selves. So I knew, boom, that would be the thesis for the ordinary bruja. So now I have kind of like an umbrella, my left and right limits where I need to stay within while I'm drafting this story. And then what I did was I opened up the short story, read it, scraped all of it because I was like, I can't use any of it. It's no longer good. However, I kept Marisol, the main character. I kept the hill there, which is a character in and of itself, Hollowthorn Hill. I kept those, but then I had to go back to outlining Act One, Act Two, and Act Three. And of course, as with every act has a goal. The goal of Act One is to set up Marisol and set up her world. So I went about, before starting to draft Act One, or to outline really Act One, was I went into a whole dissect of Marisol Espinal. Who is she? What were those key moments in her life that made her into the person that she is at the beginning of the story? Someone who doubts, who minimizes herself quite a lot. What were some things in her life story that prompted her to be that way? And I read Story Genius. I reread it while doing this part because it's a book that really makes you understand that people really lean into the why behind stories. Whatever kind of story you're doing, it's a book that tells you that we are wired to want to know story. And the reason why we're hooked is because we're always trying to answer the question why in a story. Why is this happening? Why is this person this way? Why? So in essence, through Story Genius, a rereading of it, I looked at Marisol Espinal's character and I was like, why are you this way, Marisol? And through that question, I was able to answer it by drafting scenes that you don't see in the book. I think you see some flashbacks of it, but you don't see the full scenes. Why? Because these were scenes that I drafted myself, kept it in Scrivener as part of the character folder for Marisol. And it was just scenes that told me, as the author, the creator of Marisol and this story, why she ticks the way that she does, why she does the things that she do. And this helps me with drafting her dialogue, drafting her mannerism, and understanding her fully, and thus presenting an authentic character that is realistic, because you kind of understand why you may not like it, but you understand why she does the things that she do, and she's consistent with it. Because I essentially crafted, before drafting The Ordinary Bruja, not her life story, that would take too much, but just the scenes, the parts of her life that make her who she is at the beginning of the story. I crafted those scenes from beginning to end. And because of that, Marisol is authentic, is like a real person in this book. And I did that as well with the other characters, with Kia. I did that as well with Doña Elvira. And I did it with Mom and with Altagracia as well, because they play crucial roles here, although they're not on the page that much, but their influence is felt. So I needed to get to know them much more than just superficially. And also because I write character driven stories, this is very important for me. I really want to know these characters inside and out, and not just about how they look. Although I do need to get to that, I have to admit sometimes that's like the last thing on my mind, how these characters look. There are certain things that I know about how they look just because I get to know them by writing these sort of backstory scenes about them. But it's not like the first thing. The first thing for me is like these backstory scenes. What are they signs, or their personality? Are they INJ, and those kind of things, their astrological signs, so that way I can tether them even more to some sort of personality trait or structure that they can fall between as I'm having them move around the story, and those kind of things. So really the physical aspect of it come much later in the development of these characters. And I usually look at actors and actresses that kind of like give me that same vibe of what I've envisioned. And then I go from there. So I can say for Kia, I have India Moore as the actress that I was envisioning. And I did a whole post about typecasting the cast of The Ordinary Bruja as I was drafting The Ordinary Bruja. And that was kind of like part of the marketing as well, as I'm drafting, while the story is still very moldable. And that was one that I saw. I had seen India Moore in a show before, and she has this vulnerability about her and this protectiveness and fierceness as well to her friends and the people that she loves, that I was like, yes, this is Kia. This is for sure Kia. When it comes to Marisol Espinal, I had Alegra Acosta as the person that embodies that relatable, haunted, sort of awakening thing going on. For Savia, I had Jasmine Savoy, because she gives off this kind of like polish, kind of like a looking down on you vibe. If she really puts her, if you cast her in that way, she can give you those vibes. For Delgada, I had Jenna Ortega, same thing, because while we don't see her in this role, she has kind of like that petty performative, kind of like jealous kind of like look that she can do if you cast her in those roles. And I've seen her on Wednesday, so I know she can truly pull it off. I have Paulina Chavez as Blanca. She has the lighter complexion, so she can potentially be like her, like assimilated, judgmental, this like influencer that thinks, she's better than everyone else. For Mama Belén, I had Adriana Barraza. And for Doña Elvira, she's always been Judy Reyes to me. Kind of like this grounded, mysterious bruja that knows a lot of things, doesn't let on, but wants to make sure that you're open before she gives you all this information. For Josefina Espinal, I had Celine Toribio. She has that cool young mom vibe as Josefina Espinal, protective as well, but just kind of like cool, wants to give the freedom, that she can for her daughter, even though she wasn't giving that much herself. So that's who I saw as Josefina Espinal. Wait for this. For Salvador Espinal, I saw Pedro Pascal. Because he has that corrupt look to him that he can play that kind of role that, I'm better than you and I'm going to control you no matter what. And that is who I envision. But this was after doing kind of like these character deep dives, writing these backstory scenes and really digging into their history that I can then look outwardly, like through Pinterest and do some Google search to really find who I think embodies the physical trait of someone that will do those kind of things. And that's how I go. That's kind of like my process. I got to know them within before I know them superficially. I hope that makes sense for you all. And then, because my stories are character driven, now drafting Act One, which is all about the reader getting to know Marisol, becomes that much more easy because now I can really just put Marisol like I did in Espresso Enchantment, and you can see how she interacts with customers, how she interacts con las tres mojonas. And from there, from those interactions, you can really see who she is in that moment, what her flaws are, and what is it that she will have to overcome. One fun thing that I added to The Ordinary Bruja, and this was just me expanding my creative bone and really having fun with this story, was this breaking the fourth wall prologue with Josefina. I wanted Josefina to come through first and present the story of her daughter. So I gave Josefina the airtime at the beginning and at the end of the story. I wanted her to open it up and close it for the reader because I wanted her to kind of admit where she went wrong as a mom, but also to show how much love and hope she has for her daughter. And I thought that was powerful because in a way she's telling you about who her daughter is. Although her daughter doesn't believe that who she is, Josefina knows as someone who raised this child and who held her in her womb, she knows a whole lot about who she is. But unfortunately, as we see in the story, there's an incongruence there from what Josefina tells us to what we see Marisol doing. And we know that Marisol really doesn't see herself the way that her mom does. But then at the end of the book, you get to see Josefina's words come out to be true. And this is why I had Josefina close the book as well, to tell the reader how proud she is of her daughter. And I love those two moments. And I did that. I went against all the rules about how you shouldn't write in second person, how you shouldn't break the fourth wall and all of that. But I did it because I thought the story merits that. I thought that that would draw the reader in. And from the feedback of beta and ARC readers, I assessed that this was correct, that the readers were hooked right away. And I think they were hooked because of Josefina breaking that fourth wall and talking straight to them about her daughter and having them, just promise her that they will stay there to watch Marisol break the curse. And it is so amazing. I want y'all to read it. Um, Even if you don't get the book, you could go and get a preview of it if you go through Amazon or any other, because I allow that. I clicked yes for being able to preview my books. So when you before you buy them, you're able to preview them. And for sure, you will see these first few pages. But I thought that was super clever. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. And that's the fun thing about being an independent author, that I can make these risks. I can make these choices. And I don't have gatekeepers telling me, no, 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 change that. That's not going to work, because historically, that's not going to work, because that's not on trend, because that's not up to par with what sells. But because I'm not tethered to that, I was able to add that into my book and leave it there, because I wanted to take a risk on myself. I wanted to take a risk on something, on my creative bone that I wanted to exercise, my creative muscle that I wanted to exercise and expand, and then just try out and see, because what's life if you don't try different things, right? I mean, what are we doing here if that's not what we're doing? So that was part of phase one, which is the entire creative aspect of it. And I'm talking about it so enthusiastically because that's something that I enjoy. So to caveat what I talked about when it comes to phase one, I asked myself, when do I want to publish this book? And that gives me a date to backwards plan. That gives me a goal. So now I have something to shoot for, and I shoot for that date. And then I go into deep dives on characters. Those, not every character, but those characters that are going to have a lot of airtime or influence in your story. I go ahead and craft these backstory scenes, not their whole lives. That will be too much time. You will waste too much time, but just those scenes. And just, if you're having a hard time, think about it yourself. What were some turning points in your life that change your aspect about life, that change you into the person that you are? I can think of quite a few for me that just turned me around and turned me into the person that I am now. The same thing for your characters. They have these turning points in their lives that turn them into the person that they are on page one. So these are the scenes, not full on chapter, but scenes that you have to craft. And this will let you know who you're writing about and what the story really is, what their flaw is, and what their fears are, and what they have to overcome. And it's like the story will write itself when you do that. And for sure, if not the entire story, act one will be so much easy, because all you're doing in act one is just presenting this character to the reader. And you've already done the hard work of figuring out who they are. So presenting them will be super easy because you know them inside and out. All right, we'll talk about act two next. So when act two comes around, this is one that I tend to struggle a lot in, because I tend to go like straight away into fighting the monster. But I cannot do that. I need to expand it and give the characters something to fight for and something to earn. And if I give them the battle and give them the win right away, then it doesn't have a good satisfactory payoff and that satisfactory feeling for the reader. And somebody told me this a few books back that I've written, and they were like, I tend to do three. Like I tend to give them three tries they fail, or two tries they fail. And then on the third one, they get it. And I think I've done that in some of the books. On others, I give them three tries, they fail. And then on the fourth one, they get it. I try to kind of like change it up a little bit, but I for sure give them some failures. And the failures are going to come from that misguided belief that they have. So in Marisol, her misguided belief is that she must stay small no matter what, because being small is what keeps her safe. It has shown to keep her safe. But she has to learn throughout the story that to embrace her full self, her full authentic self, she's going to have to expand and show the world who she is. But she doesn't learn that. She keeps going after the hill, trying to save her mom, then trying to save her dad, with the misguided thought of, I'm just going to do this one thing while not changing myself at all, and I will win. And each time is a failure. And one failure, one failure is bigger than the next morally. It brings her down to the point where she questions herself as to, is it even worthy? Is it even worth it to do what she's doing? Is she worthy of this fight? And she has this mirror moment, this literal mirror moment, where she faces that fear of facing her authentic self. And when she finally does, she goes back to the hill, and that's when she gains some traction. So, in essence, I'm expanding on that theme, right? The theme that I said I wanted to have for this story is, what do we risk when we don't accept our full authentic self? And I show that in the way that Marisol goes up the hill and she loses because she hasn't embraced her full self. And then she has this mirror moment where she comes face to face with who she is, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything. And then she accepts it. And then she goes back to the hill. And now she's getting traction. You see, so this is how I'm showing the reader what the theme is, what the message is of this story. And then that builds some cohesion in there. And that's when readers get to feel some sort of satisfaction, or they understand that this story has meaning. And from reading Story Genius, these are the kind of stories that readers are attracted to. They want cohesive stories that have a meaning, that means something, that they can come out of and understand, this is what life is, or this is what life is for Marisol Espinal, or this is, or they learn something about themselves through a character. So when you leave readers with that, they leave content and they leave satisfied. That's what Story Genius tells us. And then the other book from Lisa Kron as well, Wired for Story, that we crave these kind of stories as humans. And it goes back to our evolution of passing down history and passing down things through the act of storytelling. So if you follow that guideline and you create these whole stories, and I'm not saying my stories are very short, they have very little pages in them. This story was 70,000 words, very short, right? But it has a lot of meaning. And there was a comment there from one of my ARC readers, was like, wow, I didn't expect all of this from a 70,000 word story, meaning that every word in that story brought something to the reader, was tied to that theme, and they were able to get something out of it. Basically, every word in there, for the most part, because I'm not perfect, there's some readers were like, it lag in certain parts and stuff like that, and I believe them. But for the most part, every word in there propelled the story forward, and at the very least was tied to the theme of, what do we risk when we don't embrace our full selves? Okay. And because of that, they came out of there satisfied for the most part. It didn't get everyone. Not everyone was happy with the story, but generally, for the most part, they were very happy and satisfied with the story. And I think it's because of that. I make sure I had a theme. I follow the theme. I embraced the characters fully. I understood who the characters were fully, and I crafted the story based off of that, off of the characters. And that gave a satisfying experience. Then Act 3 for me is usually the easiest of all the acts because it's a culmination of everything. But this is also the act that for me, it requires a lot of attention to detail. And it's usually the act that I go back quite a lot to. Act 1 and Act 3, I go quite a lot, you know, back and forth too, because I want them to be bookends and I want them to be kind of like before and after images of one another. So I have to make sure that it has that if I mention something, if something was left on Act 1, I want the reader now to see it as, oh, it's right. It's on the right side now. And that's the change. That's the change that Act 2 brought to the book. And let me explain. Uh, there were some things in there about Marisol's outlook in life. And I wanted to make sure that in Act 1, it was kind of negative, kind of, grouchy, self-doubtish, like I don't think I'm ever going to come out of there. But then in Act 3, at the end, after the climax, I had Marisol go through a walk in the town. And then you see she has these thoughts about certain things. And it's not verbatim the opposite thoughts of Act 1, but you can see how her outlook in life has changed from Act 1 because now it's more positive, it's more hopeful. And you can tell by the way that she sees the hill now, by the way that she sees the town as non-threatening. Even the light all of a sudden is different outside. You see? So that's why I go back and forth and to these two acts as I'm drafting the story, just because I want them to be that. I want them to be the opposite of one another. And that shows the reader the growth because that's what they're looking for. In the opposite, if you're writing a story that is flat, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you're writing a story where there's no growth or there's negative growth, then you want to make sure that you show that as well. So you want to look at your Act 1 and your Act 2 and show either that lack of growth or a negative growth on the character. And that usually happens when a character ends up turning into a villain at the end of the story. Those are good stories as well. I think any progression, whether on the positive end or on the negative end, or even if you do a flat line, no progression character, it still can be satisfying and good. It just all depends on how you write it. And really that's all it is to it. As long as you write it in a way that satisfy readers' curiosity about a character, and you develop that why behind the character, as opposed to just saying the character did this and did that, but there was no connection to those two actions, then you're going to hook the reader. You just got to give the reader that why. And that reader will follow along that why all the way to the end. Like Marisol kicked the ball. Why did she kick the ball? Well, she kicked the ball because she thought, that Salvador Espinal put it there. So she kicked it to spite him, But if I just would have showed Marisol kicking the ball, the reader would have been, why is she kicking the ball? I don't get it. So that's kind of what I mean when I say the why. What is the why behind the actions and the things that happen in the story? That's very important for the reader to know. But as long as you have those things, the outlining of Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 are going to be fairly easy. You're still going to have to draft it. You still going to have to put words in there, but at least now you have kind of like the left and right limits of that act. And then you're better off that way because at least now you have a path to get through. And that's essentially how I do phase 1, by telling myself the date of the launch of my book. So that way I have a way forward, and then asking about the character and all the characters that matter and have a big influence on the story. And from there, just doing the Act 1, which is all about the main character, their problem in the story and their misbelief. And then Act 2, which is all about how they go about fixing that problem the wrong way until they get to the point of no return where they have to face their misbelief so that way they can do it the right way in act 3 and get to the climax and then the resolution and then the after picture. And boom, that is the planning of a story for phase 1. All right, that was the whole planning phase of phase 1, which is just all about how to create that story, because phase 1 is all about the creative endeavor of creating a book, a fiction book. And I talk about some references that I use, such as Story Genius, Wired for Story, and Save the Cat as well. It's one I didn't mention it here, but that's something that I use as well. And there's one or two more, and I'll put it on the show notes so that way y'all can reference those as well. But like I said, if you're a creative, if you're a writer and author, this is the phase that I will think that you are more apt, more prone to embrace and to do, because you're creative. So this is going to be the one that you lean on, kind of like how I do as well. And we can go in depth a little bit more, but I want to jump into the planning for phase 2, which is marketing. And marketing is intricately linked to the technological side and the business side as well. But phase 3 is really involved in the business aspect of it, but marketing phase 2 is as well. And I want to tap into that. And then after we go through the entire planning process of how I do it, then we can go into the execution. How is it that I go about doing it? And that has to do a lot with habit forming and time blocks, scheduling, which is something that I'm very much a geek when it comes to. I love experimenting, and because I move a lot, I adjust my time blocks quite a lot for my day. So it's something that I do quite often, and I'm very nimble and flexible when it comes to that. And I just take a look at my circumstances, my lifestyle, my resources, and then I go off from there when it comes to how I execute all these subtasks as part of the big project, which is publishing a book. But that is something that we will tackle later on. But chew on this. If you have any questions for me, let me know. Or if you have any answers for me or how to and how you do it, I would love to know as well, because I love learning from others. It may be something that you do that I haven't even thought of or conceptualized. I'm like, that may work for me. And as with everything that I say here, and I will say the same thing when it comes to my podcast, it worked for me. For you, it's going to be different. You know yourself best. So see what you can tailor to your life, your circumstances, and what you can do, and go off of that. Okay? All right. Talk to y'all later. Bye.